Dear everybody, it's very nice to be here, but I heard so much about Lincoln seminar. I was never invited before, so therefore it's a pleasure to finally be here. Then I would like to say I'm so ignorant that I'm sure that Lincoln seminar was at Lincoln, but it's actually in the University Auditorium. This is not a poor place to be because this is maybe one of Norway's most beautiful halls and venerable. It's particularly nice to be here. Not many years ago, this hall was not very beautiful. It was worn, deteriorated, cold, was not good taken care of. Then luckily came the financial crisis, and then we were desperately looking for things to renovate, and we found this hall. It was renovated for 500 million Norwegian krone. And to put it like that, we got something for the money. Because in Norway, there are some politicians, some financial experts say when doing good, we cannot use money, but when sometimes luckily things go bad, we may use money, and then we were able to renovate this room, and that's the reason why it's so beautiful as it is. Then I'm happy to be here because I can thank the Atlantic Committee and all you who work there, who make an effort. You contribute in the discussion of security debate, both, and security policy is high up in the news, but also in the cases where it's not in the news, but it's important that somebody keep the discussion going. I even think it's nice to be here because it's so nice to come home to Norway and experience Norwegian winter. There's a lot of nice things to say about Bristol, but it's not nice situation for skiing. There's no Norwegian winter. I live in Bristol for the time being and started with something I think I would never do. I remember Sigurd Johnson did everything he was in USA, and that's to visit old battlegrounds and visit war monuments. He did that to study the Civil War. I have started doing that in Bristol and the surroundings to study the battlefield and war monuments in the part of Europe, mainly from the First and Second World War. Places, Flandern Fields, Ardennes, Verdun, all these places where there have been Normandy, where have been large battles, particularly in the 20th century. And it's a cruel reminder of how cruel war is. And it's a cruel reminder of that war has always been cruel, and that war has been even worse after war was possible to do in this industrial methods. First and Second World War killed millions of people, and our ability to kill, our ability to inflict suffering, our ability to destroy has just been greater since then. So it has always been important to fight war, but it's even more important in our time than it was before. And therefore, its meaning gives meaning to travel around and see the places, to be reminded how close it is in time, how brutal it was, and how much happened in a limited geographical area in Europe. So that's the one thing that I experienced in Brussels. Second thing in Brussels, two of maybe three most important institutions that the world created after the Second World War to prevent war: EU, NATO, and in New York, United Nations. And that's a barricade that we constructed in unity, and that has served us well. And it makes Brussels, for me, both a symbol of cruelty of war, but even the mankind's ability to build institutions to prevent war to happen again. It's even for me a reminder that peace can be secured to different methods: political, diplomatic, financial, social. European Union and UN has a lot of them, and they do a lot of important work for peace. But we even need a strong defense, a credible defense, to contribute to secure peace. Of course, you are reminded in NATO but I had experienced that somebody that reminded me directly as a general secretary of NATO, even the Pope. I was excited about the visit, but I thought he might be critical to NATO. The first thing he said that is NATO is an organization of peace, because he quoted some old Roman military people already in ancient times say that if you want peace, you have to prepare for war. And that's what NATO has been about around 70 years, almost. It's about securing peace through contribute to secure credible, adequate defense. We have done something for almost 70 years. Norway has been a member for always 70 since the alliance was founded, and Norway has contributed and do contribute to NATO's forces. We have done so under different phases of time. What we see now is that the challenge for NATO is changing, that we face new challenges. There's a lot of things that change simultaneously. We have a more self-confident Russia. We have insecurity, terror close to our borders, not at least Iraq, Syria, Middle East, North Africa. And we have spreading of mass destruction weapons, North Korea, atom, nuclear, cyber, and other kinds of threats. So we face a more requiring security political reality. The world has become a more dangerous place, but NATO has become stronger. I will spend some minutes, but not too many. I will not cover everything NATO does to face the new security situation. I have promised to spend time on answer questions. I would spend some minutes going through three of the most important tasks that face NATO in order to handle the new situation of security. Those three tasks are: one, we have to strengthen our collective defense at home. We have to handle crisis and insecurity abroad, and we have to strengthen the transatlantic ties. First, about the collective defense at home. NATO's core task is to deliver collective security, collective defense for NATO. That task we have always done, but particularly one period, 90s into the 2000s, where, among others, countries like Norway was afraid that too much of NATO's focus was about NATO's focus was a crisis in other parts of the world, and too little focus on collective defense home. Norway took initiative to something called the Close Area Initiative, that was about NATO has to continue to focus on Europe and the threats in Europe. I don't want to think that it's because of Norway, but it's the fact that what has happened regarding crime, Ukraine, stronger Russia has done that NATO has come home and are focused on the tasks in Europe. And we have already started to strengthen the collective defense of Europe. We have carried out what must be described as the strongest enforcement of the collective defense since the end of the Cold War. We have tripled NATO's response force. We have created immediate response force. We have created four units in the Baltic countries. In Poland, we have increased our presence. Southeast in the alliance, we have strengthened the cyber defense and even extended our rocket defense. And so regarding strengthening the collective defense in Europe, the enforcement of that since 2014 has been implemented since many years, and after many years of reducing, we have started to increase the collective defense of Europe. We should be proud, and I'm impressed how quick NATO has been able to refurbish and focus on the collective defense. Our collective challenge when we face the summit of NATO in July is that we have to continue with that job. It has to do about several things, among others. to train, to start reinforcements units, to have more units for reinforcement if necessary, to move forces and units quickly through Europe. It has to do with infrastructure, the roads, the railroads, and the transport means that has disappeared or become less present than they were during the Cold War. Then it's about renew our command structure after many years of reducing our command structure and adaptation to that. We were about handling crisis outside the NATO borders. We will now reinforce and renew our command structure so that it's more and better suited to face the situation in Europe, collective security, collective defense of Europe. One element of this that Norway has been and is initiator the last years has been to have a new operative commander for the Atlantic. It's about to strengthen our ability to plan. It's about strengthening our abilities to practice. It's about strengthening our ability in a crisis situation and a conflict situation to handle Atlantic Sea as the tie between North America and Europe. There we see more challenges now because we see increased Russian presence, and we see critic infrastructure, all the cables that we can communicate the way we do in the modern society. We see submarines, and we understand that the tie, that the connection that the Atlantic is must be secured in the critical situation. We haven't made the decision yet. We will have a summit with the Minister of Defense in a couple of weeks in NATO. This will be a main issue. I'm sure that the Norwegian Minister of Defense will make an argument for the suggestion, and he will, as the former previous did, and I will agree. And the goal is to do the final decision, to make the final decision about the command structure, which is NATO, that we have a structure in the peacetime that can both plan and be there in the crisis, in the conflict time, to secure that forces and units from 29 countries can be the right time and work together. That's the command structure who produces, and they have to construct it to face the real threats that we face. That will be a contribution to further strengthen our collective defense at home. Norway gives a considerable contribution here too with a new F-35 planes and the frigates already not brand new. They were new when I was the Prime Minister. The frigates, new maritime patrol, submarines, and the things that NATO appreciate a lot, and an important contribution that Norway give, not least in the north. At the same time, we normally say that Norway is NATO in the north. That's correct, but NATO is not all NATO in the north. It's important to remember that the Americans are there, the British are there, many other countries are there. So we're together in the north, and that's the strength of NATO in the north. Let me now, when I discuss regarding strengthening our collective defense, just let me stress the following that has been an important message that I have placed importance on from the first day. Is the first thing, as when I came 1st October 2014, is that we do not want a new Cold War. We do not want we want Russia is our neighbor. We want to cooperate with Russia. We have to try to have the ambition to have a good relationship to Russia. Because I tell the people who have been skeptical that there's no opposition between strength, dialogue, and to be firm. On the contrary, when we're strong, we can have a dialogue, and even when we look back on the Cold War, there's no sign of weaknesses. the dialogue Norway has had with Russia is no sign of weakness. We have had always dialogue with Russia regarding border questions, fishing, and so on. So there was now recently a dialogue on the top level with the Russians. That type of dialogue is not weakness. It's a sign of security that we engage in such a dialogue. That was not obvious in NATO in 2014, neither in 2015, but has become a broad agreement in NATO that dialogue with Russia is something that we need. In 2 years, from 2014 to 2016, there were no meetings between NATO and Russia. Now there has been 6. There are demanding meetings, but because of that, there are important. There's a frame for discussing Ukraine, but even other questions of military security, handling of increased military activity along our borders. Now, task number 1, to strengthen our collective defense, but to do it in a proportional, defensive, and proportional way that does not contribute to increase insecurity and at the same time to create a good neighborship to Russia. Second task is to handle crisis and conflict outside NATO territory. We have done so in several decades. Our situation very different. Bosnia, Serbia, Kosovo, Fyro, Macedonia, former Yugoslavia, Afghanistan, battle against pirates. Everything is crisis outside NATO territory. But there's one thing that the NATO countries can learn and will influence our work with this in the coming year. It is that we will try to twist our efforts to place less importance on NATO enjoying the large battle operations, forces on the ground, and that NATO contribute more and more to build local capacity. It's simply because we believe that over time this has a greater effect, is more lasting, is more effective, contributes to creating stability. And that's actually what we have done in Afghanistan. We were there with more than 100,000 soldiers. Now we're there with 16,000 soldiers, as we were before, battling. Now we're more like a educating situation. It's the Afghan soldier themselves who performs the job, who are in the battles. This is a philosophy that I'm sure over time will give greater results regarding different dilemmas that we face, for example, in Afghanistan or Iraq. We're not only supposed to win the war, but we have to win the peace in those countries. We have already decided to increase our presence in Afghanistan. We are expected to make a decision to create an operation in Iraq where we will be engaged in the training, building capacity to make sure that we will not have to return there either as NATO or as a coalition, USA-led coalitions who are joining in great battle operations again. So to practice, train, build local capacity is our most important method to stabilize our neighbor parts of the world. I have to spend some time now on the third issue, to strengthen the transatlantic tie. True world wars and the Cold War has learned us that North Europe and North America depend on each other, and NATO is the institutional frame around that situation of dependency. I have, as long as I have been political conscious, heard that the transatlantic relationship is degrading. I was so fortunate that I traveled around USA in 1980 with my father, Torvald, who was the Minister of Defense. In 1980 is a long time ago, and all the university, any think tanker, we heard that Americans would not be so concerned with Europe because the generation that experienced World War II, they were on the way out, and they would orientate themselves against Asia. We have heard that in different variations or ever after that, but the truth is that the transatlantic relationship is still the beam for our security, and for North America and Canada, they are strongly obliged to European security. This is not anything that you can count on, because there are forces in USA that think that Europe should take care of itself, and this relationship had to be nourished. But still, the last decade, the transatlantic relationship has been better than many people believed or feared, and we have experienced it again after the Cold War. The Americans reduced their military presence in Europe. The last American tank left Europe 2017. Now the Americans return with more tanks, brigades. They will lead one of the units in Poland. They increase their military presence. First time since the Cold War, they spend more money on infrastructure, on exercising, on pre-storing. We see that in Norway, Værnes Airport. We see that the Marine infantry, the Marines who are there, we see that Charlie Juncture, we see larger and more exercises, even in Norway. So it's both the Americans return, but even Canada return, and they had one of the units in Latvia. And we have more triple American investment, what they call a European Deterrence Initiative. So the picture of that North America, USA, Canada are leaving Europe is wrong. On the contrary, they return, they spend more money, more people, more resources on the presence, something that even Norway can see concrete examples of. An important part of Transatlantic is the division of burdens in the alliance, and all NATO's leaders of state made a decision in 2014, and it's not this is not a coincidence, because that was the year of Crimea, Ukraine, Donbass, Israel become the threat that it did in Iraq and Syria. So the world is changing. So NATO decided that we should respond to that. And we do that through a decision that says that we have to stop the cuts in defense costs. We will gradually increase and move to do 2% of the BNP. 2% is historically not a high level. We were on 3% during the Cold War. In Norway, we were on 3%, around 3% during the Cold War, and until when Kåre Willoch was the Prime Minister and Gro Harlem Brundtland was the Prime Minister, we were over 2%. So it's not impossible figure. We had that level before, both Norway and Europe. And the good thing is that we have seen that the Europeans, the ones that have spent less than 2%, they've started to deliver. The cuts have stopped. There has been an increase that's significant. 2016, 2017. We don't have the figures for 2018 yet, but we have reason to hope that there will be an increase. I'm not speaking about Europe and Canada, and as well as all the countries participate to do that lift, even Norway. Norway has increased as other European countries have increased their budget. It's maybe a fact that what is positive for the larger degree of this budget go to new investment. My message today, we shouldn't believe that we have done the job. We have both promised more. When we say we, I mean 29 heads of state have promised each other to do more. And there is a need for more. And therefore, I count that this is the start. We shouldn't consider the job to be done. It's the start of increase that we have promised each other. And it's important that we deliver because it's both about the capacity that we gain, which is necessary capacity to face more and more insecure world, but it's also because of the community, the glue that ties us together. But we promise each other something to protect each other, and we have to do that when we have promised each other. So we have a good faith that it will happen in Europe and in Norway. And we hope that we will be an initiator when we move toward the summit in July. I will finish by saying that NATO has been the most successful alliance military of history. We are the strongest of the two reasons. One, we have been able to stand together, and that's not obvious in a time with a big difference. Even today, there is a big difference internally in NATO, and some of what I spend most time is that to handle that we are 29 countries with different political culture, different leaders, different opinions about many things, and many things insecurity about what many leaders will say about the unity that NATO is. This will never stop, but I'm also impressed the fact that the NATO countries always join together about the core mission to protect each other. We can disagree about many things, but the core issue that we are secure together, we have been unified, and it has made NATO strong. The second reason that NATO has been a successful alliance is we have been able to adapt to change. And I also refurbish the Norwegian politics, but it's not easy to refurbish NATO art, but it's important. Refurbishing to change when the world changes is the second key for NATO's progress and success. So that's all I had time for. So I'll give you answer to your questions in the question round. Thank you very much. Thank you. Heartily thank. Interesting and straightforward speak. We have 30 minutes for our decision for questions. I will start with the SMS questions, and we will have some direct questions from the audience. So there's no point in raising your arms yet. But before we start, I must congratulate to get an extended period as a General Secretary of NATO. Not everybody gets one. Not 2 years. Is that because of your personal qualifications or other arguments? And did you ever have did you have any doubt saying yes? I was not in doubt. I like being in NATO. Maybe to like is maybe it's not the right word because there are many sad things, but I like it. And my experience is the more complicated the world situation is, the more meaning it gives to be in NATO. I remember when I was in 2014, I was asked. My father was totally skeptical that I should go into NATO. He said it's better if you do vaccine medicine programs. And he told me that NATO is sort of old man's club, and he was a little right about that in January 2014. But after January 2014, that was when ISIL arrived and made the world a more or less secure place, when they control large areas in Syria, Iraq, Mosul, Raqqa. We got annexation of crime and everything else that we experienced since that. So it's possible that NATO was a quiet place until winter 2014, but it has not been quiet in NATO and surroundings after that. I hope that is not because of me. That there has been a coincidence between. I don't remember the rest of your question. Why? There are two theories. One is I'm a great guy. That's theory one. Second theory, of course, second theory, one doesn't have any other alternative. The way you see it, what's the most important as your function as General Secretary of NATO? What role should he, or maybe sometimes hopefully a she, should you, have you done things differently from your predecessor, or is it just to dive into the secure political situation and try to make a compass? I believe, in a way, I defined the two most important tasks, what I said in my speech, to contribute that NATO is united and that they're able to change. And it's combination that's difficult, because if one just being united, maybe that would be possible. But when should both you be united and change, that can be a challenge. But I have led governments with different parties, and now have been the leader of NATO. There's something common in it. There's something finding the balance between pushing for compromises, but not push so hard that make it impossible. So this is political craftsmanship more than anything else, and maybe that's a more important thing that I've been doing. I see now we have received some questions, but I could imagine that why I read this question, which conflict in this moment is the most challenging for the alliance, if it's possible to pick one single conflict that you feel you should use a lot of time. I got that question often, and I believe in the beginning I answered. At the beginning, I always answered, and afterward, I understand I was wrong, because the point is there's not one conflict. NATO's challenge is that there are so many conflicts at the same time, and that they are so different. It's an immediate and continuous threat for terror attacks that could have a connection to an area, Afghanistan, Iraq, place in the world where the NATO are active. This is immediate and always there. And then there's a Russian who's more self-confident, but it's not an immediate military threat. But we can see that they stand behind processes that undermine the confidence of our democratic system, that kind of things. And then we have cyber attacks. That's not. It's not just silly. It happens every day. And then we have North Korea, and try to arrange them. It makes no sense. The important thing for NATO is to handle all these issues simultaneously. I have now the first question. It's clear to the world that Turkey, who is a NATO country, has started an operation against the Kurds in the border area to Syria. What about NATO? Has NATO forgotten the Kurds' efforts to battle the IS? Turkey is an important ally. It has been, not at least fighting terror. NATO is present in Turkey, a coalition that NATO is a part of to fight ISIL. Daesh are in Turkey. We use bases in Turkey to fight ISIL. And we would have a much more difficult task to win against ISIL in both Iraq and Syria, unless we had Turkey as an important part of that fight, both that they contribute with the capacity and that we can use Turkish infrastructure to fight ISIL. Before I continue with that answer, it's easy to forget. Not long time ago, ISIL was genuine threats, controls 7.5 million people in Iraq and Syria, big cities. At the moment, we were afraid that Baghdad would fall, so it has required a massive military effort to fight ISIL, and Turkey has been important. Turkey have experienced a lot of terror. No NATO country and they had a brutal attempt on military coup. NATO is in Iraq. NATO is not in Syria on the ground. We try to help the coalition. What I said in my speeches or my conversations, both with both with Erdogan and others, is that it's important to have contact with the countries that are on the ground in Syria, in Turkey, to try to prevent a situation where part in the coalition fight each other. I think everybody understands that. That's why we take it serious. Turkey, they have briefed NATO about Operation Afrin. They will brief us again, and we'll try to prepare for more, as much contact as possible between the countries that have forces on the ground in Syria. NATO is not on the ground in Syria, as I said, but some NATO countries are, including Turkey. And what we have, what a NATO country has contributed to fight ISIL, and NATO support the peace process, the attempt on peace process that United Nations is in charge of. We think that's the only a permanent solution in Syria. One more. And what kind of international crisis will Russia pose a threat against Norwegian territory or infrastructure? Sign Groholm. I would be careful because I'm concerned we don't see any immediate military threat from Russia. You can create scenarios, analyze. You have to do that to prepare for any crisis. But I'm always concerned when we do that kind of analysis. We shouldn't do it in ways that we contribute to create insecurity and sort of increase the risk of conflict. It's easy to make many theoretical examples, models on conflicts where Russia could be a military threat, but this doesn't mean that we see an immediate risk. The reason I say that is because I experience sometimes that one speaks as though there were an immediate threat. There isn't. And of course, it's possible to imagine in the future a different situation where things can change rapidly. As we've seen, I think there is or isn't. In Norway, people, it's often said that the conflict maybe wouldn't start in the north, but it could spread to the north in a situation where Russia would have the desire to protect their military forces and Kola and move them into Atlantic. Norway could easily come on the backside of that, and non-dependent if that conflict is about Norway. Norway could be pulled into that kind of conflict. That shows the importance of securing the sea roads, Atlantic Ocean, and that's what's NATO is about. And Norway gave good contributions. Before we leave Russia, I have a question too. Russia seems to increase their emphasis on nuclear weapons. How do you face that without getting arms race? And the Russia, they have a tendency not to differ very strictly between a nuclear and non-nuclear weapon. So it's a very dangerous way of arguing. So it's very dangerous. It creates the impression that one could have a limited nuclear war. We see in Sabbat they exercise the nuclear weapons in some kind of continuum, from starting with the traditional weapon and ending with nuclear arms. This is always a dilemma, to find the balance point for NATO between being capable of handle that kind of situation without contributing to unnecessary arms race, and there's no there's no clear border, but I think it helps to be open, to speak with the Russians, to have a dialogue. I think it's important to be very concerned to continue with the disarmament treaties that still exist. Russia and USA agree about important treaty 1550 pieces of nuclear weapon. This is a day of to celebrate. This actually comes into power now. We have the EIF treaty. We have this Pershing crosser SS-20 rockets. The Americans consider that the Russians they are now breaching that treaty, that important START treaty, because the treaty can contribute to prevent the new arms race, and these treaties are the cornerstones. If I can get some microphones, I will ask a question from SMS, and then we have some microphone. You mentioned the importance of the transatlantic connection regarding European Union. How has that that's become? What about Berlin, and what does it mean that European Union seems to concentrate with the PESCO system? How is the relationship between NATO and European Union? That's the important question. I'm glad that somebody asked it. This is one of the things that's great to see, that we have cooperation between NATO and European Union that we have never saw before. And this is because of the circumstances around us, but it is also, just to be modest, a strong political will, both in European Union leadership and NATO leadership, to make that cooperation happen, and that we have got rid of some prejudice from before. I think it's a paradox that I come from a non-European Union country, but they never had a general secretary who has been so concerned with Europe, with you, than me. So maybe that's not so strange, because I have been in the European Union summits and dreamt of being a member. Yes, I think I have learned to live with Norwegian not joining European Union in '94, although it's difficult for me. The truth is that NATO and European Union cooperate in a number of fields: cyber, hybrid, maritime, and a lot of fields. We practice together. Corner parallel exercise. Yes, we exercise the parallel, but yeah, this is complicated to explain. We have parallel training in the same room. The point is that it's tighter than ever before, and it's my opinion that it's good that European Union strengthen their military cooperation, as long as they do it the way that doesn't compete with NATO, but completes it, because they have promised it, because they have understood that they cannot replace NATO. After Brexit, 80% of the founders come from non-European Union countries, and three of the battle groups are I think Juncker and Tusk, we were prime minister at the same time. We know each other well. We speak about the things. We agree. They both support NATO. They support EU. We are good friends and work close together. We have 11 minutes left, so we will take some direct question. Mr. Espen Barth Eide has asked permission. I think we'll take two questions. Thank you for a great lecture. I'm very glad to hear that NATO have come home to the core mission. Regarding nuclear, and one our greatest concern should be the development of small tactical nuclear weapons. So I'm concerned about Russian, but even Trump and USA, I think some of the work regarding having a credible deterrent without use of nuclear arms. So the most danger that is that if you have available weapons, that becomes tempting to use. I think that's the greatest challenge for NATO now.
Of course, you can ask your question in English.
I shall do this in English. My Norwegian is somewhat limited. Morning, sir. Unwrap myself. You cited Begesius, de re militaris, si vis pacem para bellum. That's where it comes from. But the nature of war itself is changing. Cyber, hybrid, high-end warfare could undergo a decisive change of character in the next few years. To what extent is NATO preparing for the future deterrence, whereby we deter war at our seams, we deter the new technologies which are emerging on the battlefield? It strikes me that we must be ahead of the technology strategy curve. To what extent do you and your colleagues grip that new reality?
Thank you very much, Julian.
Deterrent, nuclear arms. First about the nuclear arms. One thing is to be able to respect that the treaty we already have made, the START treaty, and for the moment IMF is more under threat than the START treaty. Another important contribution is to have sufficient conventional forces so that we have a conventional deterrent so we never end in the situation where we have to lose, give up, or use nuclear arms. So one reason why I think it's important that we deliver what we have promised to others regarding collective defense, expenses for defense, is that we have the credibility, the conventional forces that gives us a very high threshold for use of atomic arms.
Then to new kinds of war. Well, I think what we have seen is that there is a much more blurred line between peace and war. Before, I think actually Espen told me that many years ago, that before we had kind of well-defined the situation, it was either peace or war. And a war started on a specific date, and it ended on a specific date, and it took place in a specific territory. And for Norwegians, the war started the 8th of May, 9th of April 1940, and it ended the 8th of May 1945. Now, it's extremely much harder to say exactly when did the war start, when did it end, and where did it take place. For instance, the fight against ISIL or Daesh, it's not possible for anyone to say exactly when it started. It's not possible to say exactly when it ends, or when it will end. And it's, it took place in Iraq, Syria, but also in cyberspace. We have some ISIL in Africa, we have some ISIL in Afghanistan. So the geographical scope, the time frame is much more blurred. The same with cyber, hybrid, all that makes it much harder to define the difference between war and peace, and that's a new challenge for NATO. NATO is responding because when we have a more blurred line and when we have new types of threats, that makes it just more important that we are increasing our situational awareness, improving our intelligence, that we are increasing the readiness of our forces. That's also one of the reasons why we have more forces in the eastern part of the alliance, to be able to respond to a hybrid situation as we saw in Crimea. When we have forces in the Baltic countries, we are of course much more able to respond. Our cyber defenses have been significantly strengthened over the last years, and we are developing our hybrid strategies. We can do more, but we have already started to adapt to respond to a new kind of conflicts.
SMS question. In Norway, U.S. Marines' presence in Værnes is controversial. How does it look from Brussels and NATO a forum where American presence is seen as something beneficial. But in Norway, we have sort of a different view on this. If the General Secretary could answer that, I will take some hands from the audience. We will take 3 more questions from the audience after that. USA's presence at Værnes in Norway is an element of a greater picture where USA they increase their presence in Europe. And that's an expression that the Americans are not leaving Europe. On the contrary, they are returning. And there's no stronger expression for that. And they spend more money, they equip more forces, they store more material, and the American presence at Værnes is just one example, just a small example what has happened in a greater scale all through Europe, and, through different forms. Again, I think it's important that it is the way it is in Værnes, that it's proportional, defensive, that we have the balance all the time. Without creating increased tension and a new Cold War situation. This will be discussed during the week, obviously. Next question, please. Please give the gentleman the microphone. No, the woman, the lady. I want the General Secretary to comment to the nuclear posture review. Oh. I would like to comment the new Trump doctrine posture review that Espen Barth mentioned, that you want to lower the threshold for use of nuclear force and develop more tactical nuclear weapon. Will NATO hold their politics of reducing such nuclear weapons, or are they influenced by the Trump doctrine? No reason to be shy. My name is Tondran. I've experienced from 4 international organizations, also cooperation with NATO. I would have your evaluation of the possibility for a closer Scandinavian cooperation with foreign policy, security policy within the frame of NATO and European Union, not at least regarding changes both in NATO and European Union and the cooperation between the two of them. Thank you. Thank you for that. I throw on the last question that I got in SMS. What was it like to meet Angelina Jolie? So you can finish with that. First, nuclear weapon. NATO does not want to lower the threshold before use of nuclear arms. We want more stricter controls that control nuclear arms. And today is a marked day. Today is the day when both Russia and USA should have reached the goal or obliged themselves to 50 operative atomic the units. Atomic rockets. And secondly, to have a credible strategy which doesn't lead us into a situation without any choice where we face losing. So that's why we build the conventional defense or the collective, defense in Europe to keep that threshold high. And of course, then we also need a modern, credible nuclear arms. That's a part of our policy. NATO's goal is a world without nuclear weapon, and we think that non-proliferation treaty is important both to prevent distribution, but also to create reduction. We would have wanted more progress in those negotiations. We don't. The problem is not the lack of political process in the United Nations. The problem is lack of political will to implement such disarmament. And then it was Scandinavia, Nordic countries. I want to give the government credit, both the previous and the present. Norway has been an initiator, a driving force for that, and the present government has been initiative for Nordic cooperation. It's very good. The challenge is that, for me, there's no alternative to NATO. This is something that we do in addition to NATO. I think both Swedish and Finns, they can speak for themselves, but that they really appreciate cooperating with Norway and Denmark, not just because we're Norwegian and Danish, but because we're NATO members, because that is the way to cooperate with NATO in the north. So for me, it's no contradiction between the two. It's a little like European Union. As long as we make sure that we don't compete, then it's possible to do it simultaneously. So it was very nice to meet Angelina Jolie, because she's very engaged and a strong person, and I'm impressed. Our people who have done some become great actors, and show that they managed that profession and got her position, and then used that for something else. She hasn't done that for a month. She had done it for years. I think already 2002, she was in Mitrovica in Bosnia. She worked for the United Nations High Committee for Refugees. She's been in Afghanistan, in conflict areas, many times. And she uses her status as a strong voice in the world to focus on refugee situation and sexualized violence in conflicts. And that's very good, and she makes our job easier. NATO worked with that for years. We had trained all our soldiers who face operations. We train our soldiers. We train soldiers in our partner countries, Jordan, Kosovo, other places. But it's obvious that when she goes around, she gives lecture, she creates focus, it contributes to get those issues higher on the political order, and it creates attitudes, and attitude change behavior, so that she uses her voice, leads to concrete action. What we do is to train. We improve our routines for reporting about sexualized violence, and we construct cooperation, partner countries, and we create a system that could reduce violence against women. So she contributes to that reduction of violence against women. Jens Stoltenberg, thank you very much both for your lecture and that's your openness on questions. It has been great to have you here. I know that you're going to the castle very soon. You have to give our greetings to His Majesty and say that not only His Majesty is concerned with security policy, but 500 people in this room. So it's a great pleasure to me to heartily welcome our great Minister of Foreign Affairs, Ine Eriksen Søreide, previous Minister of Defense and MP. And you have the NATO Secretary in the audience this time. Please, welcome. Dear Kate, dear everybody in the committee, Jens, Frank, even Knut, I would mention in this connection. It's a great pleasure and honor to be allowed to speak to this audience even this year. It has been great to do it all the years as a Minister of Defense, but it's great today with a record big audience, and in addition to that, impressive program. I would direct a thank to Anne-Grete, because Anne-Grete has, through all the years I have been lecturing here, been the driving force to create the seminar the way it has become. And as we come from different political parties, I think it's important to give her recognition. In December and January, there has been a quite active travel program that has given a picture of it's about security policy, climate, terrorism, and to a great degree, the situation on the Korean Peninsula. When I was in Brussels last Wednesday to unify the parties in the Middle Eastern conflicts, first time since Mr. Trump announced his decision about Jerusalem, we were outstaged by Angelina Jolie. I must admit, it belongs to the story that a lot of Norwegian journalists, that instead of being the European Union's premises, run away to the meeting between the NATO General Secretary and the actress. That was very successful, and the work that she does is an important part of the job that NATO is into. But the visits in Washington and Vancouver even confirm to a great degree the strong ties that exist between our closest allies in this connection, particularly USA. We can, of course, problematize different sides about our relationship. Of course, to have a good political debate, we have to have a critical glance on ourselves, our relationship, our alliances. But the overall impression, although many people are very focused on a challenging period for the West, it's more that unifies the West than diverges us. Transatlantic unity it's not automatic. It has been built through 70 years, and it has been hard work. It's based on common interest, common values. It's particularly the values and interests that we have to defend. It's particular challenges. And particularly in the time where the political development goes in different directions, so everybody knows that there are different allied interests. This is nothing new. Periods through the 15th, when I spoke about crisis in NATO, crisis in the transatlantic cooperation, as well as, for example, 1956. In the middle of the Soviet intervention in Hungary, France and Great Britain made an effort to take control of the Suez Canal. This was against American interests. So the result was there was a humiliating armistice for Great Britain. And they have to pull back. So this requires concentrated and hard work all the time, because 1956 is a very good example. Just weeks after this crisis in Suez, it's a paradox. It showed the start of a new and important and positive development. Just weeks after that crisis was a wise man's group under Norwegian Minister of Foreign Affairs, Halvard Lange. They created a report that started closer political cooperation within NATO than before. Cooperation in NATO and unity has always been important for Norway. Without solidarity and unity, NATO would deteriorate as a defense alliance. I mean that politically and our values, what we believe in, what we have in common. That's what, in the end, makes political leaders in the NATO member countries to be willing to sacrifice their own soldiers' life for common interest. That's what ties us together, not new commander structure or how long the meetings would be. That's what ties us together. And to avoid that, the deterioration is, of course, a priority for the government, that these ties deteriorate, that are the actual glue. Although the program at Leancoln this year is influenced by divergent interests in the West, still the most acute challenges are still the ones that come from outside. Number one, a more self-confident Russia that reduces democratic space and to use in general methods. We know that methods we see that stakeholders that have been weak have used such methods. But sooner there will be election in Russia, and there are little chance that there will be any changes in their foreign policy and security policy. And also, there are challenges south and southeast to Europe, and they challenge, they give rise to a lot of challenge to Europe, and we have to rely on that. It will remain so for the years to come. This is one of the reasons that the government has created a plan for vulnerable states. Number three, considerable and continuous threats against global challenges, so-called. Jens mentioned them: international crime, cyber, terrorism. And the particular about it, they don't afflict states directly, but afflict citizens. So this means that the security policy are carried to the doorstep of European citizens in a way that we haven't seen before in peacetime. And we see the global challenge, and we see pressure against international norms, international cooperation. I would never believe that what I would spend most time on my time as a minister, not only to contribute to progress, but to prevent deterioration. For example, in United Nations, many things that are the grounds for our progress and our growth are under pressure. We need more cooperation, not less. But now the world is torn in different directions. Isolated, it's very good that we admit that we're a new normal situation, that we face the world the way it is and not as we would like it to be, but we have to adapt our policy. We have to adjust our expectation. We have to give more priority to things than we have done before and been used to. But this creates a risk. We could again stiff and freeze in political reflexes where we before very optimistic saw a straight line against a prosperous future. We could end with drawing straight lines towards a more abyss. And we have to be careful because the history will still be influenced by our choice, and we make our own choices. The world will still create surprises, and 2017 was no exception. We saw North Korea nuclear program again being listed as the world's most emergent security problem. There's some time since we saw that before, but development has been very fast. Something else was the fast territorial battle against ISIL. There were even their so-called capitals in the caliphate was taken from them, but the battle is not over, and a lot of areas to be stabilized. Third, the political dynamics in 2016 was a year of shock for many, but 2017 was maybe for some kind of relief. One was that we saw some extremist movement lose elections. But on the other hand, we saw some of the established structure of party disappear, particularly because new movement was created. What this means in the long run is too early to tell. We saw a European Union that one of our very gloomy predictions regarding Brexit. They were unified when needed as most. We saw a new dynamics in the cooperation in the security defense area, and 2018 has started with the global financial progress, good prognosis. IMF said at the beginning of the year that this is the broadest synchronized global increase in financial we have seen since 2010. That's a positive sign. A fourth sign is that increased American engagement in security policy. A lot of people, the fear that American working alone, and that would result in less engagement in our region, our security. We see that on the contrary, they increased their efforts many places, Afghanistan, Syria, but not at least in Europe. European Deterrent Initiative, it's $4.8 billion. That's a multiplication, that's a lot of resources. And that's one of the biggest American investment in European security in many years. It's a very important American signal. And simultaneously, we know that this means a greater responsibility, even from Europe. We know that we experience a great interest from Norwegian ideas about security in our close area. We are very concerned with the American leadership, but I want to tell everybody who thinks that the world would look different with USA. What we experience is continuity. We experience a great engagement and maybe even an increased engagement. Are they willing to cooperate, among others, with Norway? We have a particular responsibility in the north, obviously, but we see that our evaluation, the interest for our evaluation for the northern sector is great on the American side. Often development take roads that one wouldn't expect when the year starts. The politics is still a difference, so the question remains, what role should and can Norway play in this landscape? We have to adapt to the new normality. We have to be more tough in our privatization, but we shouldn't lose ourselves in this picture. When the Prime Minister in Washington said that we are an allied you can trust, this means that we should be possible to recognize in our principles and in our values. I see it as important part of a job as a foreign minister. We should speak for human rights, right of nations, everything we do, NATO, United Nations. This serves our interests and have done so for 70 years plus, and not at least and contributes to our security. Given the subject for this year's conference, it's natural to concentrate about our closest area, because security is shaped by what happens in the close area and the situation in our own region. This is where we face the great challenge of security. This is where we have most knowledge. This is where we meet our closest allies, and this is where it's possible to accomplish the most. I want to draw 5 important prioritizations, which is to strengthen the transatlantic cooperation and solidarity. We should contribute to a stronger Europe. We should nurture a friendship. If Norway should need assistance, sometime we should have less tension as low tension as possible in our close area. We should have a good and pragmatic relationship both to Russia and other neighbor countries. First, regarding a transatlantic cooperation, the relationship to USA is vital to our security. NATO is the only alliance with both a credible security guarantee and a credible military capacity. And then allied, they will never agree about everything. That's the way it has always been, and it will continue to be so. But the more important is it that we are unified in the areas where we have this common interest, and security policy is obvious such example. The strength is how to strengthen unity. And there are three answers to that. One, engagement in each other's security. We often speak about when Europe should take responsibility for own security. It's just as important that we take responsibility for each other's security. That's the core essence of the North Atlantic Treaty. And the point is that we oblige ourselves beyond our own interest. We don't look narrow into them. We do it when it contributes to Allied presence in the Balticum, as Thomas Petersen will say more about from the Telemark Battalion. Tomorrow, when we participate in anti-ISIL, when we are in Afghanistan on the year number 17, and we contribute within all NATO's core fields, and we engage ourselves in RIMPAC in the Pacific operation. The point is that this is important to Norway, it's important to Norwegian security. Number two, a better division of a burden. The arrows are pointing in the right direction for almost all NATO countries, and that's good. In Norway, we do our part. We have increased our defense budgets since 2013. That's a considerable lift. And the Minister of Defense will speak more about that. But we make big investments in new capacity, that the battle planes, maritime patrol flights, and intelligence capacity. Triton Juncture we host with thousands of allied soldiers, and we contribute in a way that doesn't only strengthen Norwegian, but even NATO's defense. And the third is that we continuously have to develop NATO. Two of the main prioritizations that Norway had the last 4 years has been a new and reformed command structure. This is now to be decided about the meeting of Minister of Defense that Frank goes to in February, and a more maritime orientation of the alliance, because there has been little focus on it in later years. Now back to the main prioritization. One, strong Europe. I have a little faith in null-sum play, and it's a strong Europe is not bad for NATO. It's very good for NATO. We have different methods, and we complete each other in many ways. The things that's important for Norway is that when EU and NATO together complete a new security initiative, but we have to pay attention to one thing, that we have to complete each other. We have to good division of tasks. We shouldn't get in a situation where we use limited resources on many different fields. We have to focus our resources. Third, to nurse close relationship and friendship. NATO has grown, European Union has grown, and we see that political development is very different. It's obviously more a challenge to build a political consensus now than it was before, and to ensure progress, to react quickly, has become harder. Cooperation in lesser groups, I think, can be a great cooperation as long as we don't create fragments. I would claim that the Nordic-Scandinavian cooperation of defense, particularly after it was stated that it's no competition to NATO, it has been important in strengthening NATO regularly. There was considerable skepticism in NATO Now there's less skepticism because one has seen that it's contributed to strengthening the alliance. But we even create stronger connection to Germany through a strategic submarine cooperation to Great Britain, as we have now regarding the battle planes, and we are responsible for the same sea areas. France, that have a new created interest in the northern areas to the Netherlands. We have a strong cooperation for practice, exercise, and USA. And several trilateral between Norway, Great Britain, and USA. Foreign policy plays a great role, and cooperation of defense last years has grown. But this is not enough in itself. We also depend on the political unity. It had to carry a lot of the practical cooperation that we sign. And then we see that a strong defense is decisive to secure the country, but it's not sufficient. History has proved that we cannot stand alone. But if the alliance should have any value, we have to have the possibility of to be able to assist each other. And through the base policy, Norway has chosen not to oblige themselves having foreign bases for foreign powers on Norwegian territory in peace time. The opposition to that is that we rely on Allied reinforcement if something should happen, and particularly because of that, we have the sufficient ability, capacity to receive such reinforcement. We have a good national plan. NATO's reinforcement plan has to be updated, and because we do not have foreign bases, then exercising with allies is the more important. Since the 70s, we have pre-stored Allied materials in Norway, and in 1981, the agreement about storing and reinforcement with the USA was made. This is a question of great importance for our own security. The degree and extent of Allied presence has varied over time, and it will continue to do so. And it has to do about finding the point of balance that gives us the right tone, both between deterrence and keeping everybody calm. That's the way it is even today. But in a time of greater military activity in our closest area, it's the more important that we look upon how we can adapt the Allied exercising. There's no drama in this because we have a long traditions, and many of you who sit here, you know that the considerable Allied exercising in Norway are the British, Netherlands, American, Swedish. We have had that through the years. That is a policy of intent from Norway. In the parliament in 2006, there was a debate regarding updating of the agreement about pre-storage of military equipment, and I think it's important. There were very good comments. They said that bilateral planning agreements is very important to Norway, and the committee at that, they opened for extended American exercise, military exercising in Norway. And then the main point, this is important for the Norwegian defense, but even for our allies, and decisive for the ability of taking care of their essential obligations in the alliance. The committee said they were content with the significance that Americans gave to the cooperation with Norway. We were in an agreement. This was also confirmed in the long-term planning from the defense, where the thing to exercise with the Allied forces has been given great importance and significance. This is even supported by political will in the Allies, and it should be understandable for our neighbors and seen from outside. The base policy is not any obstacle to wise security political choice. The once reliefs Mr. Jon Lyng's Between East and West book from Norwegian that in the 60s and the 70s, most of the same discussions we have today were tied to Allied activity and exercising in Norway. The fifth main priority is about the relationship to Russia. It remains an important factor in Norwegian foreign policy, it's both in Norwegian and Russian interest to maintain a low tension. In the north, we have developed a good and practical cooperation that serves both interests. But simultaneously, we know that this relationship remains asymmetric in its size, and that's why it has always rested on two pillars: our belonging to NATO and the Western system, and secondly, the practical bilateral cooperation on the other hand. And as a Minister of Foreign Affairs, it's my duty to strengthen both these pillars. It's predictable, it's a long-term policy to base the relationship of to Russia on predictability and firmness has always been the Norwegian line, and it will be in the future. So, finally, some words about the allegedly diverging West. We see obviously a political difference between our allies, and we sometimes see that some allies want to import conflicts, issues that they have bilateral to NATO. It's a big challenge. Movements and thoughts that we believed belonged to graveyard of history, they occur in new forms, reappear, and sometimes they get political significance. But we see some important difference compared to the past that we should take into consideration. Today's protest parties are fighting a battle of words, not with weapons of violence. They seek power through election, not through revolution. They come in power, but they lose power. And they often make, when they make the statements without compromise, but places where they are in power, they always make compromise. So I don't see today any straight lines, either against liberal order or at their abyss. But we have to be prepared for high waves, greater differences, and less predictability than what we have been used to. Also among allied countries, we have to be prepared that the optimal solution, not as much as before, will be available. Sometimes we have to choose the second best or alternative that we don't love that much. As the Minister of Defense said, we don't face always the best solution, but less the next best solution. But not to make choices also have consequences. I think it will require something that we have not been used to, and something called in our security situation, we have to be able to handle most of this fluctuation of policy. We have to be able to face, to receive criticism, to give criticism. We have to be prepared that it might take more time to effectuate things than we have been used to. We have to be prepared to defend what we have. Can we handle that? Yes, if we study the program for Leoncul this year, we might get depressed, anyone, but let's not forget these are challenges that we have had before and we have managed it before. There's no reason why we shouldn't handle them now. Are democratic values in the press? Yes, they are, but that's not the first time. Is the political situation in some countries more unpredictable than before? Yes, it is, but that's also something new. Since 1949, there has been different kind of military coups in different NATO countries that are now NATO. But they are now the best NATO members. Yes, we will also be face more international dilemmas than before and challenges. We have to be open to it and to handle challenging internal challenges. We have to be able to do that without losing ourselves, and we have quite a good experience with that. Historically, Norway has handled it well. We had a clear foreign policy with prioritizations and a clear which was founded in liberal values. That's obviously the foreign policy that the present government work after. The political platform from Jeløya repeats the main point that foreign policy main target is to secure Norwegian interest. We do it best through a credible policy where we still rely our security in cooperation with others based on NATO and in the transatlantic relationship. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you heartfully. History is influenced by our political choices. We will now listen to which political choices and prioritization give the Norwegian Ministry of Defense. I welcome our relative new Minister of Defense. He came in office in October, Frank Bakke-Jensen. He came from a job as European Union Minister in the ministry. Heartily welcome. The stage is yours. Heartily thank you. Thank you for the invitation to an arrangement that, even if I wasn't a part of it before, I have registered its reputation that it's an important arena to discuss quite heavy but basic question. Since I have been in the committee of financials, that you're not only full book, you're overbook. That's a very good sign. That's a lot of interest and a lot of people who want to attend your conference. I'll start with say something about the defense discussion, because now we have got a picture that things have changed during the years. I think that influenced the national debate. When I got the job as a Minister of Defense, I started to read what's in the depth of the people. After 3 days, that to go to USA to buy these fighters, these planes were different. The response I got, we should have built these fighters ourselves. We can laugh of it, but this shows that now this engagement around the defense. This means that we get a debate. The old idea about defense was sort of left behind, and now this picture of the new picture of security, and we have to think anew. We have to mention again the two pillars for the news and defense. It's the national capability of defense and a credible membership of NATO. In 2013, I was chosen into what's called the NATO Parliament in beginning of 2014. I attended one of the first meetings there. I met somewhat a disillusioned association of PMs that discuss NATO was not in Europe. NATO was more interested in Asia. And to me, it appeared as sort of nice club where you could association where you can be a member. And then things changed quickly. And first were the PMs from the Baltic countries who said, now you have to wake up. You have to be on. Why? Yes, because through 20 years, they have collected a set of value that we have. They had constructed liberal democracy. They have administrated human rights, freedom, and suddenly they saw it was threatened. In the discussion came Finnish and Swedish PMs. And so this is something that's happened. And in the course of some months, the discussion changed, and The important thing was Russian annexation of Crimea, the stabilization of eastern Ukraine, and one faced a more unstable Russia. One started again discussion the collective defense and the basic things, and one went back discussion NATO. We discuss not only Norway has to work with the commando structure. Norway has been an initiator regarding that. And it's important in the debate common understanding of the prioritization that has to be done. It's a good thing in the world, but it's important too to keep stability, openness in Norway. Therefore, it's the case that we change the structure, we change the structure of the bases. We are back in Norway. We have more sea hours, more flight hours. Prevent misunderstandings. In areas there are more tension, can be discussed as more activity, to be present, to have a good understanding of or situational awareness, to have more footprint in north for the Norwegian defense is important. That's why we will go down, and we will place NATO back in the Atlantic basin. We will be clear on this. In Norway, we are facing a discussion, are we in a race or in a Cold War? And some of that discussion, I think we do have, because we have to look into our own recent history. We have a lot of 50 years old like me who have done the national servers. Most didn't want to. We had to. We have this understanding of the idea of defense. And many years we haven't only a small part of Norwegian state national service. So when I meet 30 years old today, there's less understanding of Norwegian defense forces. I think that influences the national debate and influences the picture of why we changed defense and the security situation. We have to make a better effort to create understanding about the present picture. And we depend on that understanding. We can see that in the debate of the base policy. I'm speaking about all base policy. I think that's a wrong concept, because the base policy says that we national decide how to be a member of NATO. Then we have said the one point that we shouldn't not have foreign bases on Norwegian soil, but to compensate for that, to appear as a credible partner in the alliance. We have to place importance on that. The allies should come here and exercise together with us. And to see that there has been changes in base politics, I think that's on the side. It's simply more activity. But we practice, we exercise as before, and the most important thing regarding base policy is that this is something that we have been quite clear on. We have communicated to our neighbor in the east. We have allied exercise. We have openness against our exercise. We appear as a credible partner with confidence, with alliance, and with Russia. That's a good. So for Russia, we're an understandable neighbor. It's important in the picture of security that it's both important because of our geographical position, both because we are a neighbor of atomic nuclear power, but but there's a sort of disproportion in the size of the countries. It's also important in the alliance that we are clear, that we are a reliable neighbor, because our second pillar are based on that we lean on NATO if necessary. Then it's important that we have exercised with allies, that we have plans with the allies, and that allies, they trust our system. Therefore, we should be host for a great NATO exercise in the autumn. We will practice military and national, and we will exercise the total defense more than we have done for years, with authorities for communications, national security, national emergency. Everybody should exercise to find out what our position and what the situation are. I was in Sweden and visited the Swedish Minister of Defense. They have a similar discussion. They had started on the other line. They had started with where is Sweden today when you want to measure the civil capacity. They have 4 regions in Sweden. And the question is a part of Sweden possible to survive in 3 months if there is a major crisis? Does each county or a part of the country have sufficient capacity? That was one of the questions. Something else was they asked the inhabitants of Sweden. They asked all the inhabitants of Sweden, can you survive a week with what you have in your home today? And when you think, how can the crisis start? It's important questions to ask oneself. We know that lots of electricity can be a greater challenge than some years ago. So where I come from, so it can be critical if electric lines are broken. We know that the secured electrical supply of electricity is critical for North Norway. We know that regarding food, in northern part of Norway we have long distances. Number of such questions we have to ask today if we should regard this. It can be easier to do sabotage because of technology. Then we are in a total different situation. And we work well with our situation to ask the same question, cooperate. Maybe we can collect the knowledge with our Scandinavian neighbors. And the security political picture, as the Scandinavian cooperation is very important. The Nordic cooperation have the element that we have 3 countries in NATO, 2 are not. And in the national debate, I often point to that to show that long lines in politics even can be important. Base politics for us is a long line. Our NATO membership are the long lines policy. For Sweden and Finland, they don't have any alliances, freedom of alliances. We are not to judge what is correct, what is right and wrong, but these are heavy political questions that one have distributed over years. It creates stability in the country to be able to point to that we historically have related to our alliances, freedom alliance, and they work along the lines, and they have the discussions. Regarding European Union, we have 3 countries, 3 other countries who are part of Europe. 2 are connected to you through EUS, EEA. But it's the same thing. This is about the long lines. We have done some choices, and we are pointed into that. And then politics are run along this line, and show that in this way we can cooperate in a good way in the Scandinavian. And we have heavy questions. My experience as a minister is the case that the good examples of of Nordic citizens, we can refer to those because they have happened because initiative of NATO or through initiative through European Union. So we will succeed in the Scandinavian cooperation. So the question will remain, what kind of mission should NATO have? How can we participate?
Noen ting som vil være styrende på det. Koalisjonen mot ISIL var altså 70 land, 4 krig, hva som er i krisa, men vi bruker forsvaret på sine områder, samtidig som vi er inne med det sivilrettslige, vi er inne med kriminalitetsbekjempelse, alle de her verktøyene for å skape et så godt forsvar som mulig. Det vil bli viktig videre. Og Norge gjør en formidabel innsats blant annet i Afghanistan, der vi er inne med støtte og trening til afghanske polititropper, sånn at de skal kunne, Afghanistan selv, fra de norske troppene som er der borte, de har gjort, men det er også en imponerende militær politikk.
Sorry for the break. Regarding the forces that the Afghan people have been able to develop themselves, I think that will be the important thing in the future. Finally, we've had several discussions around our neighbor in the east. Also, I used as an example how we regard this. If we're now in a Cold War situation, and we always answer no. And I'm asked, are we entering a Cold War? I answer no. And my argumentation for that is that when I was in national service in 1985, I grew up in Finnmark, close to the border of Russia. So it was something dark, unknown, fearful, frightening on the other side of the border. It was not only my opinion. That was adrenal, particularly the young people. My 30-year-old younger daughter see Russia as the most interesting neighborhood. She had Russian in school. They have internet. They have different channels who show us Russian in a different way. And my daughter has intuitively learned that on each side of the border lives people like you and me. This was an understanding that I had to get used to during my childhood. And that's the background when I always say, I say no if I'm asked, are we going to a Cold War? It's a person that was 20 years in 1985. I'm 50 today, but we have learned a lot through our trip. We think differently. That's, I think is that we are in many ways on the way in this security political difficult period, and let me make an optimistic finish. We have so many tools than we had when we started the work. Thank you very much. Thank you. Thank you. And you had a brief lecture, so we have some time for questions. I still take questions through SMS, so we have 15 minutes to our disposal, so I will not use a lot of time speaking about the committee. It's great to have you. First, one question to the Minister of Foreign Affairs. Can you say something more about plans for a broader and political dialogue with Russia, apart from the bilateral that we have spoken about already? Yes, I'm happy to do that. As I mentioned before in my introduction, we have two lines. We have developed a good practical cooperation, fishing, atomic security, and people-to-people cooperation. And these are lines that we want to continue and reinforce. In addition to that, we have particular cooperation with the Arctic Council have taken a very positive turn that we see is important, but partly regionally, partly it's a cooperation that we place a lot of importance on and that we draw benefits from, even bilaterally. When so much is said, we are concerned, and we have said that before, regarding the limitation of the democratic space in Russia, we see a direction that is more and more that we breach of basic human rights, the right of congregation, right of expression, freedom of speech, and the way of reacting internally even gets quite strong foreign policy effects. So from our point, we want to reinforce both pillars in the system we have, and this mainly happens typically. A lot of things happens in the north, and it's tied to the practical cooperation that we have. One of the things that we spoke about in international cooperation is that our common administration of fishery, and when we know that in the beginning of the 80s we had the poorest cod ever. We have one of the biggest stakes of cod, and in both countries we collect, we benefit from that. And one last thing, I think the same cooperation would not have been possible if we hadn't had a strong NATO behind us, as we are based in the alliance. Do you have anything to add, Frank? Otherwise, I have a question that goes directly to you, and it's whether you are able to reflect on Norway's contribution to the enhanced forward pressure situation in Lithuania. To begin with, as an overall, what I said in my introduction, the meeting and the NATO MPs, you're in a situation where we have to prove that the alliance works. I think that's the important thing to prove it. You get there are some member countries, they get worried, and then you decide to support to be there. This is not an aggressive way to demonstrate power. It's a way to make visible that this is an alliance that you can be together to create security in what it's primarily about, to create security for the inhabitants in the alliance. And I think that technically we do a good job. The staff, the servicemen that's there, they're good at cooperating with organizations regarding the discussion here, regarding allied training. We have to exercise home, and we have to exercise we have to exercise in our own home country and in other countries, shortly speaking. There are a lot of countries cooperating, and this is under German leadership. Has this been without any complications, or do you get feedback that there's a problem of cooperation? Yes, I get examples that it's not so easy. I have participated in a UNIFIL unit myself. I think we should be open that it will always be possible to find a problem when several nations are to cooperate in a unit. But this is about having a multinational force, and we are in operation where one takes care of the different, yes, even this it has to be practiced and exercised. Always in such situation of cooperation, so close cooperation, that there will be some obstacles. But the idea choosing Litauen is because we wanted to continue on the army side, the cooperation that we have already with Denmark and the Netherlands. The idea with the cooperation with close allies to make that kind of choices that we didn't. And this is a choice that we continued since we continued in Litauen. It had further intention than not just this single exercise, but it had a higher sky. Then a question to both of you. Can Norway contribute more to strengthen stability in Ukraine? Thank you. From Harald Wøstkjønn. I can start. We agree that this is a foreign policy question. Ukraine is one of our greatest receiver of benefits, aid, with 200 million. And this is an area where we want to extend the practical cooperation, and there is a progress, but there is a problem because Ukraine has to implement difficult political reform in a difficult time, difficult period, and one of the ideas just to continue, and in eastern Ukraine, the insurgents activity has increased, and this makes it harder to implement political reform. So we have a wish to reinforce, to extend the political cooperation, but the channels of aid is a method of use. What about United Nations? From Ministry of Defense, it looks okay, but this is discussion that's important. That's a good question, because this is about that we need the patience in Finnmark. There's often this: are these sanctions really against Russia really necessary? And we said yes. We are a small country. We don't partly support international law. We fully support international law. So it's important that we're there and that we're clear on our support to Ukraine. I can take some questions from the hall. 3 questions. One here. The gentleman in the red pullover. Could you stand? Like this. Given that there are so many losses by these NATO-trained Afghanistan combat soldiers, how can you speak about any kind of good results for Afghanistan? One more question. Asked through SMS regarding NATO and the European Union relationship. Does it have any significance for Norwegian security policy that now European Union are now prioritizing PESCO? cooperation. So I would like, could you please answer? Don't tell me that. Don't give me the easy answer. Is there anything else behind it? Thank you. And then the last, final question to the Minister of Foreign Affairs: if you could be more specific regarding the old Russian Russia area of influence. What is the issue here? The great losses in Afghanistan first. That you create Afghan forces is very good. We have to be aware this is difficult. This is a land at war. When I was there last week, we discussed it, and there have been 3 ugly incidents. Among others, terror attack through an ambulance. When we speak with the Afghans, they say that look at this. See what we have accomplished. It went through the first control, but then we stop in the second control. Who knew probably what will happen? So they actually stopped it from getting in where it actually was heading. So when they are now contracting forces who can face terror, but the losses are great. The great losses are on the Afghan side because they are under fire, but there are international forces who take care of the inhabitants' security as good as. I think that is what we have in the back of our heads in all these matters. Regarding the aggregate question, if it has any consequences for Norway, yes, it does. And that's why we, in the Norwegian side, want to tie to the initiative. We are the only third country who participate in this program for improved research for defense. I was in Brussels, spoke with Mr. Katainen, that Norway wants to connect themselves to industrial part, not just research. We have not yet been able to accomplish, but we want to follow up on that. We are very active regarding EDA, European Defence, European Union's research agency. This is because we see that for us as countries outside European Union, but they're very closely connected to the European Union, our European agreements. We want to participate, but it has another side, and this is what I mentioned to begin with. We should not end in a situation where we're not able to accomplish a reasonable division of tasks. So one should not get alternative structures. We have the resources that we have, and we have to strengthen what each organization is good at. What NATO is good at is military defense command structure. What European is good at, as is pointed to, is that the particular cyber hybrid attacks, which is something that European would want to contribute. I think that's good, and we hook up to that. But we had sort of waiting regarding PESCO because we do not know yet what PESCO will be. But if there is something there that we think is important for the European security, the last question was tied to limitation in the democratic space. Yes, we see that on many fields and in many countries, but it goes a little up and down. But some of the areas that's worry me most is freedom of expression, freedom of congregation that are under pressure in many countries, and the rights for indigenous people, homosexuals. And it has increased. Often the argument is national security, national values, as if it was any contradiction against, for example, be possible to express oneself in a demonstration. So this is a tendency that we see many places. It's something that we strongly object to, internationally and bilateral. This is something that I mentioned to my colleagues in country where this is most serious, and this is something of what we should just give and be able to receive when development is going in the wrong direction. And the whole point is, will we be able to conserve our community of valleys? But simultaneously, we should cooperate both in the field, meaning on the ground, and NATO's policy is not to interfere with inner politics in member countries. That's a balance all the time. But we have seen an increase of some lands. They lift into NATO bilateral problems, and they use NATO as an organ of consensus. This is a development that creates concern. And there's a lot of positive things in the world also. I have to say that, yeah, there are a lot of positive things. And when you are in good company, time passes quickly. I know that you are going to meet with the NATO's General Secretary. He awaits you in 5 minutes together with the Prime Minister in Parkveien. So I will let you go, but we'll give you a great hand. Thank you for coming.